Hello everyone, and welcome back to Aero Innovations. I'm Aero, your AI host. If you're new to the channel, I specialize in videos that not just entertain, but seek to educate and improve the skills of the average viewer as a poker player. We've got a super exciting episode for you today that I can't wait to dissect. I get aces twice, I make 3 sets, I get the jiggities, the ladies, and I also get involved in a $4,600 pot. This might be the spiciest video I've produced so far, and that's saying a lot, considering I've produced, one other video. There's a lot to discuss, so let's just get right into the action. Tonight, as usual, I'm playing 2-5 at the Wynn Encore in Las Vegas. It's 1:12 in the morning. I buy in for $1,500, which is 300 big blinds. 25 minutes into the session, there's a live 10 when I stare down at pocket aces under the gun. The Rockets, the Arnold Schwarzenegger of live action poker. I open to 40, the button and small blind call. We're going 3 ways to an ace-high rainbow flop. We make top set, but this board is as dry as it possibly gets, so when the small blind checks me, I check it back, and the button checks as well. The turn brings a jack of clubs, and a possible backdoor flush draw. Small blind checks again. We want to start piling chips into the middle. I still have the absolute nuts, but if I bet here, I can only go for small value. I decide to check again. The button takes a stab at the pot, with a bet of $55. Small blind folds. This is the same opponent I ended my last session with when I folded ace-jack to a raise on a jack 7-8 flop, after I lead with a $75 bet into a $120 pot four-handed. It's time to take revenge. I'm not afraid of a whole lot since we're heads up. I don't want to raise too much so I can keep a jack or a small ace interested with this complete dead draw, but I have to make it enough to take out any naked gut shot possibility, like king-queen, king-10, or queen-10. 3-4, 3-5, and 4-5 shouldn't be too relevant in this situation, because any sane person shouldn't be calling with those types of hands to a $40 open in a 2-5 game. Right? Right? Well, I hope you're not playing with those types of hands anyways. I decide on a price of $155. The button calls, and we go to a river. It's the king of diamonds. Not a perfect river, because queen 10 of clubs does beat me, but that's about it. We go for thin value and cut out a bet of $140. The button quickly folds and we move on, up $174 in 25 minutes. Phew, that's a good hourly. Alright, that's all I've got for you today, guys. I just made as much as a server after a full day of tips. I rack up and decide to sit back down and play the next hand. A few minutes later, I pick up ace-9 of clubs and open for 15 in early position. A young Asian guy with about a $1,300 stack 3-bets me to 50 in late position. Everyone else folds. This is not the type of hand you want to call out of position to a big raise, like, for instance, $75. Because if I just hit a naked ace or 9, I'll have no idea where I stand. But for 35 more, that's equitable enough to call. The flop is absolutely gorgeous. It's ace-9-2, rainbow. I check. The original raiser cuts out a super tiny c-bet for 35. I'm not getting the impression he has anything whatsoever, meanwhile hoping he has ace-king. I just call. The pot is now $185. If I thought the flop was pretty, the turn was just absolutely perfect. It's another ace, bringing 2 hearts on board. I make the absolute nuts. Now I'm really hoping he has a big hand like ace-king or ace-queen. I check again. My opponent makes another annoying bet of 65. Not exactly what I was hoping for. At this point, I don't think this guy actually knows what he's doing. This is where I think I played this hand badly. If he had a hand like pocket jacks or queens, he's drawing completely dead. If he has a flush draw, he's drawing completely dead. If he has one of those silly positional isolation hands like 7-8 suited or 10-jack suited, again, he's drawing completely dead. In fact, any hand not containing the last ace is drawing completely dead. Unfortunately, with the second ace on board, the vast majority of complete airball hands are going to check back the river once I call here. He's got a pretty deep stack, so I want to try to get it all in by the river if he is in fact holding the last ace or a big pocket pair. I want to make it look like I'm making a play with a flush draw. I make it huge and check raise to $300. My opponent snap folds. I go into deep despair. What do you guys think? Should I have just smooth called? Should I have just made a smaller raise? Tell me what you think in the comments below. Obviously, I think I played the hand wrong, but you can never second guess yourself by being result oriented. If he had shoved there, I would have thought I was a complete genius. 40 minutes into the session, I pick up ace-10 offsuit under the gun. I open to 15. The button calls and the small blind calls. The flop comes king, 2, 5 with 2 diamonds. I I have absolutely nothing except a hope and a prayer, so we all check around. The turn is a jack of hearts. Now there's 2 diamonds and 2 hearts. Small blind checks. You may think I have nothing here, but I probably have the best hand against a plethora of different draws, like the 2 different flush draws and the open-ended straight draw. I decide to charge the various draws an expensive price of $50, which is a slight overbet once you factor in the rake. A naked jack would have a hard time calling here, and any small pocket pair that's currently beating us should fold as well. The button calls, and the small blind folds. We're going heads up to the river, which is an ace of diamonds. It's not a bad river. I like it. There's no point for me to bet here because we're likely only going to get called or raised by a better hand. Queen 10 makes Broadway, and the diamond flush gets there as well. I check with plans of snap calling any pot-sized bet. Instead, the button checks back. We show our hand. It's good. So now I am up $361. 20 minutes later, I open to 15 with Queen 9 of diamonds under the gun and get 3 callers, including the button. For our beginning and intermediate viewers, this is not the type of hand you want to limp with. However, if you balance your play and open small even when you have huge hands like ace-king or big pocket pairs, hands like this can be really disguised. The flop comes 8, 9, 10, rainbow, but it's a really connected board. I flop middle pair with a gut shot and a backdoor flush draw. Since I'm first to act, I decide to check. If I were closing the action, I could go either way between checking or betting. Under the gun +1 leads for $40. The button and I both call. The turn is a 9 of hearts, bringing 2 hearts on board and giving us trip 9s. If you're a novice, you might get overly excited here and wet yourself. However, this is not the type of hand you want to check raise with on this type of board texture. I decide to find out where I'm at and lead with a single black chip with plans of folding if I get raised any sizable amount. Pocket 8s and 8-9 suited will often raise here, as well as any flop straight. Instead, both players just call. The river is an inconsequential 3. I was really hoping for a queen to complete the open-ended straight and give me the essential second nuts, losing only to pocket 10s, since pocket queens here is as unrealistic as that hot internet chick who tells you she's too shy to come on cam, but is all too happy to send you spicy pics. I'm still losing to all boats and straights, so instead of checking here and facing a potentially massive overbet, I decide to name my own price and lead for $175. Again, I plan to fold to any sizable raise, but this price should keep any naked 10 interested, like 10 jack or ace 10. A lot of players bluff in this spot in my position with a naked jack, like ace jack, to try to get a cheap turn, and then they can't help but bluff the river with a small bet, so oftentimes it's profitable to look them up on this river with just a 10. Instead, both players fold. I'm up $813 after an hour of playtime. This is the spot where my wife would normally tell me it's time to come home, honey. You've made enough for the day. Come home to your family. Thankfully, she's asleep at this hour. For our next notable hand, we open to 20 under the gun with pocket jacks. Nope, they're not jiggities. Not today. You can't be jiggity every day, my friend. Remember what I said about balancing your play and opening to a similar raise amount even with your premium hands? This is one of those situations. If you open small when you have a small hand and huge when you have a big hand, people will take advantage of your small hands to 3-bet you, and you'll also be readable like a book, so no one's going to give you any action when you actually have a big hand. Here, we get a caller in late position. The button and big blind tags along as well. We go 4 ways to a flop of 8, 8, 9 with 2 clubs. At least there are no overcards, but this is not exactly a great flop. We're either incredibly behind or only slightly ahead. Any flush draw containing an overcard is flipping against us with roughly 45%, or any combo draw like 10 jack or 6, 7 of clubs is mathematically ahead. And of course, an 8 has us in ridiculously bad shape. We're only ahead of small pocket pairs or a naked 9. When the big blind checks it over to us, I decide to lead with a conservative bet of $40. The late position calls before the button raises to 200. Big blind folds and I snap fold as well. The late position calls. For educational purposes, I'll discuss the rest of the hand. The turn brings a random 3 of hearts. Late position checks and the button bets another $200. To my surprise, the late position caller folds. The pot is much bigger than it was before, and that stagnant bet of 200 should have made any hand that called on the flop even more equitable to call on the turn. It's not like the turn was a connected card that made it more likely for the button to have a full house. So what did we learn? The late position guy is most definitely a fish, and the button has no concept of bet sizing. This information about both players will come in handy later. After the hand, the button quite proudly announces that he had 7, 8 of diamonds for flop trips. An hour and a half into the session, I have about a $2,300 stack when I stare down at pocket queens in the small blind. My luscious ladies. There's a middle position raised to 25 when the button 3-bets to 60 with a stack of about 650. I'm happy to get it all in with him. I 4-bet to 175. The original raiser suddenly cold calls with a large stack that has me covered, which is quite alarming. He's proven to be somewhat unconventional though, so I'm hoping he just has pocket jacks or 10s. He's the guy who was previously on the button with 7-8 of diamonds. I'm really hoping the button shoves here so I can make this pot heads up. Instead, he just calls. The pot is already $525 when the flop comes 8 high with 2 spades. Let's hope the original raiser doesn't have 7-8 suited again. I lead with a substantial bet of 250, charging flush draws, while also targeting small overpairs like 9s, 10s, or jacks. The original raiser calls and the button folds. The turn is a jack of hearts, though I think suits are irrelevant here. Great. That was the hand I suspected my opponent was most likely to hold. Obviously, I check. My opponent tanks for a full 45 seconds before throwing in a bet of 250. At this point, I think there's a good chance I'm behind, but I can't fold just yet for that price. The flop after the pot betting was already over $1,000. He might be doing this with just 9s or 10s if he thinks I only have ace-king. The river brings a 10 of clubs, which is absolutely disastrous. I no longer beat 9s, 10s, or jacks. I beat absolutely nothing other than maybe ace-king of spades. If he so much as breathes into this pot, I'm out. Obviously, I check. Thankfully, my opponent checks behind. I announce my hand and table queens. It's no good. He shows kings, the big daddies. Damn, that really sucked. Why is it all the pretty ladies have daddy issues? Take a luscious lady back to your house only to have daddy follow suit with a shotgun. And just like that, all of my profits evaporate into smoke, but at least I'm still up $81. 30 minutes later, I look down at 6-7 of hearts on the button. There's an early position raised to 10 from our nemesis with the kings. Now here's a lesson for the novices. Just like how you need to balance your opening raises, you also need to balance your 3-bet range so your opponents don't always think you only 3-bet with monsters. I 3-bet here to 30. The big blind cold calls, since my 3-bet is only the same size as a normal raise, when the original raiser suddenly 4-bets to our surprise Pikachu faces to the tune of $130. These are the same 2 Ogre Lords I was involved with earlier when I had to vote pocket jacks, and also the same guy I just lost my queens to. Remember the information I said to hold on to earlier? Well, with a starting stack of over 1,600, this raise amount is definitely an amount I'm willing to get involved with for only 100 more in position. I call, and so does big blind. The flop comes jack high with 2 hearts. Delicious. Delicious in dungeon. I couldn't ask for a better flop other than just outright flopping an absolute beast. We have a flush draw, a backdoor straight draw, and we can also pretend like we're holding pocket jacks, depending upon the action. Big blind checks. The OG raiser bets 200, which is a sizable amount. A half pot bet for an overpair is pretty standard. Had he gone for a smaller bet size, I might have been able to raise here, but for 200, any raise in my end will put me in a really bad pickle if the OG raiser decides to shove. And any pickle that's not Pickle Rick is a bad pickle to be in.
I'm Pickle Rick!
So I decide to just call, and the big blind calls pretty quickly as well. Gosh, I hope he doesn't have a bigger flush draw. What do I want on the turn? I'm not sure if a heart will be any good. Maybe a backdoor straight card like a 9 or a 5. The turn brings a 9 of clubs. Oh wow. Asking you shall receive, I guess. Big blind checks. The original raiser bets out 400. I tank for a full minute and 20 seconds while going over my options. The pot was already $1,000 when my opponent bet 400. I'm never folding here. Is he really doing this with only an overpair? And if so, can I get him off his hand? I have 1,300 behind at this point. If I shove and he does decide to call, I still have between 14 and 15 outs against any overpair, depending upon if he has a heart or not, and 13 outs against a set. Eventually, I decide I'm getting such an amazing price that it'd be a better play to just call. I mean, if my straight hits, it'll be completely disguised. And if my flush hits, the pot will be so big I don't think my opponent could lay down his hand anyways. Immediately after I call, the big blind rips it all in like a loud fart at the dinner table. No one's happy about it. At least, I'm certainly not. The final count is $999. It's $599 more for me to call. I really hope he doesn't have Queen 10 of hearts. I'm never folding here for another 600 though, unfortunately. The pot is absolutely massive. After 30 seconds pass, the OG raiser asks how much I have behind. I puff out my chest and announce 9, when in fact I only have $899. Maybe that extra dollar will dissuade him from going all in. I'm never folding for another 600. But I'd rather not put in my last 300 and end up with 7 high. Although, if he does go all in, I've already made up my mind that I'm calling. The pot would already be 3,700 the moment he moves all in, with another 900 for me to call. That would be 900 to win a pot of 4,600, or 20% of the pot. So as long as my odds are better than 1 in 5, it'd be profitable for me to call here. Removing Queen 10 of hearts out of the equation, I'm almost always forced to call here, since I suspect that I should have anywhere between 13 to 15 outs, which would be roughly 33%, or 1 in 3. So when my opponent pretends to tank for another full minute before announcing all in, I snap call. When the river brings in the lovely ace of hearts, I splooge my pants and quickly table my cards, even though I'm technically not first to show. The big blind says he had Queen 10 offsuit, for I turned gut to the nuts, while the OG raiser shows he flopped a set with pocket 8s. Oh, how satisfying to slay these two ogre lords with my small Asian thieves' dagger. Queen 10 offsuit should have never been in the hand to begin with. Remember how in my last video I suggested not even bothering to limp with these sorts of hands other than on the button? Forget facing a 3-bet out of position. Then we have the other guy, who 4-bet with pocket 8s, also out of position. If I had had an actual premium hand like kings or aces, I would have 5-bet him off the possibility of even flopping a set. That aside, most flops are not going to favor pocket 8s, and a player of my caliber can normally pull the rug out from under him with some highway robbery. Plus, even in the event he smashes the flop with an 8, like in this instance, he just ended up bloating the pot unnecessarily when he could have lost a much smaller pot. So now we're up $3,069 in only 2 hours and 20 minutes into the session, but there's still more action to come. For this next hand, it's only been a few minutes since our last massive win. I didn't get a chance to set up the camera in time before there had already been considerable pre-flop action. I opened under the gun to 20 with ace-king offsuit. There's one caller before the button raises to 70. He's the guy who just flopped a set of 8s on the previous hand. His stack has been reduced to about 1,800. Big blind cold calls with a short stack of about 175. 70 is a pretty small raise against a $20 open with one caller. I recognize he's trying to bloat the pot up in position. I want to single out the short stack, so I put in a hefty raise to $325, which I would do with any of my premium hands like queens, kings, or aces, or in this particular spot, ace-king. The $20 caller folds, but the button calls, which is incredibly alarming. The short stack puts in the rest of his 175. What does the button have? Queens? Jacks? When the flop comes queen high with 2 small cards and 2 spades, I have a whole lot of badoogie. I check. My opponent tanks for a good while, counting out a couple of green stacks to place a small wager before deciding to check back. The pot is already so massive that even a set of queens should bet here. Maybe he doesn't have anything after all, or maybe he just has a small pair. Who can say with this guy? He's already proven on multiple occasions to play unconventionally. The turn puts out another queen, but it's the queen of spades, completing the unlikely flush draw. I double check my cards. Nope, no spade. I check, with plans of check raising this turn and slamming the river as long as a 4th spade doesn't show up if my opponent bets. Maybe he has a small pair with a spade, or maybe he has the same hand as me, but I can get him off a chop on the river, as long as another spade doesn't hit. I might not be able to win the main pot, but there's already a $300 side pot, which will get much bigger here if my opponent bets. Surely enough, he bets $250, which is the same size he considered betting on the flop. I quickly count out raising chips, and decide on a raise of $750. This should leave him with another $750 or so, roughly, which is enough for me to bluff the river. All these chess moves, all this thinking and plotting ahead, right out the window when my opponent shoves his entire stack in my face without a second thought. Whoops, my bad. I just lit over $1,000 on fire with ace high. Damn it! I've been watching too much Brad Owen, too much Mariano, too much live at the lodge. My opponent is forced to show his hand since the short stack is already all in. He tables ace-jack of spades. He hit the miracle turn card to win not only the pot, but an extra $750 from me. Yes, he did win over $1,000 from me. And yes, he did win quite a sizable pot. But personally, I would never advise calling $325 to a 4-bet with ace-jack, even suited in position, especially when there's already a short stack all in. You're going to be behind 100% of the time, and you don't know whether hitting an ace or jack will be any good. Plus, in the event you do hit a jack, there's still a good chance I can blow you off your hand. In this situation, my opponent ended up making a flush, but you shouldn't be results oriented. So I didn't get this hand on video, but for my next hand, I opened under the gun to 15 with pocket 8s. Only the big blind calls with a sizable stack about 1,500 or so. The flop comes queen high rainbow with an 8. I flop middle set on a board more dry than grandma. The American dream. Money and a pretty lady. When the big blind checks, I put in a tiny down bet to $10. He puts in the check raise to 40. Oh my gosh, I'm drooling. Can someone get me a napkin, please? Please, please, please have pocket threes. There's no reason to raise here, so I just call. The turn puts out an unsavory ace, plus now there's 2 hearts on board. I'm afraid this will kill the action when my opponent suddenly smashes the $110 pot with a full pot-sized bet of $100. Oh, so you're not afraid of the ace? Okay, that's good to know. I raise him to $350. I'm really hoping for an all-in here. After a little bit of time, he calls. Well, he doesn't have a set, that's for sure, but he has a hand worth calling a pretty huge raise out of position. Maybe he has queen 3 or queen 8 suited, or maybe he even has ace queen. A lot of intermediate players and even inexperienced pros will often get excited when an ace or a queen hits this river and they make a boat. In fact, I just saw this happen in my very last session, in a situation almost identical to this one. A guy flops a small set on a queen high board. He check raises when an ace hits the turn. Another queen hits the river and he puts in a full pot-sized bet. When the original raiser puts him all in, he ends up calling, only to lose his entire stack of almost $2,500 against ace queen going runner. So if an ace or a queen hits this river and my opponent checks me, I'm just going to check it back. Thankfully, this doesn't happen. Instead, the river is an inconsequential 5 of diamonds. Deuce 4 does make the will to beat me, but that's about as real as O.J. Simpson's innocence. We only want to discuss real hands here. So when my opponent checks it over to me, I decide to put him to the test. He most definitely has some sort of 2-pair combination. If I were going to bluff this hand with a missed flush draw, like King Jack of Hearts for instance, which might have floated the flop to my opponent's small raise, I would bluff huge here, like massive, like a black man's Johnsonville sausage. So I have to do the same with my real hand. I go for an out-of-the-park home run with an overbet of 900. My opponent quickly folds, but at least I'm back in the green for 2340. For this next hand, there's one limper and an early position raise to 20, while I smile down at a familiar pair. Oh, it's my friends from American Airlines. I've missed you guys. How much are your summer airfare tickets? $80? Okay, I make it to 80 in the small blind. The OG raiser calls. The flop comes ace high with 2 diamonds. I flop top set of aces for the second time today, and against the same opponent. This is the guy who bet 55 earlier when checked to him, and also happens to be the same guy from my last video when I folded ace-jack on the jack-high flop. By the way, at the end of this session, I was able to ask him what he had that hand. For those of you who thought I played that hand poorly, here's the big middle finger to you because he let me know he had 9-10 suited that hand. He flopped the absolute nuts. When I asked him why he would raise with the nuts on a rainbow board, he said it would lose value if any overcard hit, or any one card straight like a 9 or a 10 which he was already holding. Not how I would have played the hand personally, but thank you for the aggression, I guess. It let me save a lot of money. Back to the hand at present. My opponent isn't that deep. He only has about 550 left in his stack. So even though there's 2 diamonds out there, and potential for Broadway cards to make a straight, I opt to check my top set. My opponent checks it back. The turn brings a king of hearts. It's not my favorite card in the world because I've just been demoted to the second nuts. Still, I need to start putting some money in the middle. I decide to start charging for show tickets and lead with a bet of $50. My opponent suddenly raises me to $150. I weigh my options. Sure, I could always go all in here, but what do I expect him to call me with? There's no way he's checking back the flop with ace-king or ace-jack, holding the last ace. That's expecting too much. And even jack-king might fold to a shove here, because he's only beating a bluff. I'm not too worried about queen 10 because he only has $400 behind. If he got a free card and hit the miracle gut shot, that would be my bad. But a risk I was willing to take considering his short stack. I elect to just call. The river insults my eyes with a 5 of diamonds, completing the front door flush. I was rather hoping for a board pair, particularly a jack or king, but I'm still calling if my opponent pushes. I check to give him some rope to try to hang himself. Instead, he checks it back. I table my top set for the win, and he shows he has pocket 10s. He was trying to rep the queen 10 with his blockers, I guess? That only works in Omaha, my friend. For the last hand of the night, I'm holding ace-jack of spades. There's a live 10 straddle, so I open to 40 under the gun. The small blind and straddle both call. We go 3 ways to a flop of 5-7-5 with 2 hearts. Small blind leads with a bet of 75. The straddle folds. I can see some players making the mistake of floating this flop. I mean, you have 2 really big overs after all, as well as a backdoor flush draw. But what are you really beating? Will a 7 pay off if an ace or a jack hits? If an ace or a jack hits, will it be any good? Do you realize you're barely beating an open-ended straight draw who has 13 outs against you, and you're exactly 50-50 against a flush draw who will normally have 14 outs against you? And those are the only hands you're possibly ahead of. I decide to fold, and my opponent is gracious enough to show he had 6-8 of hearts for an open-ended straight flush draw. Even though he only had 8 high at this very moment, he's actually a 2-to-1 favorite against my particular hand, and he's even flipping against pocket aces. Ace-Jack suited may look pretty on paper, but if you completely break the board, it's better to just let it go. In for 1500 and out for 39.23, for a profit of 24.23 after 4 hours and 11 minutes of play. If you found this video entertaining or educational, I'd really appreciate it if you clicked the like button. It would go a long way towards helping me produce more videos of this nature. And if you'd like to see more of my videos, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to be alerted when new videos come out. These videos are taking a lot more of my time to produce than I originally thought, but I'm still going to work hard to get at least 2 new videos out a week for you guys. Please comment if there's anything I need to work on, and I'll try to incorporate it into future videos. May your pockets be lined with cash and your goblins and demons be slain. I'll see you in the next video.